Welcome to the NFP Podcast, where we explore the empowering world of natural family planning. I'm Amy Smith. Join me and my co-host Emily Appledorn each week. Together, we're here to dive deep into the science, the stories, and the spirituality behind NFP. Every week, we push back against the free love culture and advocate for a culture of responsible love, where intentionality and respect are at the forefront of family planning. Join us as we discuss everything from the practicalities of charting and fertility awareness to the profound impact NFP can have on relationships and communities. Whether you're new to NFP or a seasoned pro, our podcast is your go-to resource for honest conversations, expert insights, and real-life experiences. So grab a friend, settle in, and get ready to be inspired. This is the NFP Podcast.
Today, Emily and I sit down with Dr. Lara Briden. Lara Briden is a naturopathic doctor and best-selling author of the Period Repair Manual, Hormone Repair Manual, and the Metabolism Repair for Women. She has consulting rooms in Christchurch, New Zealand, where she treats women with PCOS, PMS, endometriosis, perimenopause, and many other hormone and period-related health problems. Please help us welcome Dr. Lara Briden to the podcast. All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, everyone.
Emily and I are thrilled, beyond thrilled, to have with us Dr. Lara Briden. She's a naturopathic doctor and best-selling author. She is based in New Zealand. Is that right, Dr. Briden?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Christchurch.
Yes, Christchurch. That's right. Christchurch, New Zealand. She's been instrumental in my experience in understanding my body and helping to heal my cycle. And I know for Emily as well. So we are just so thrilled and honored to have her with us. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Briden.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, us too. So we want to focus, even though Dr. Briden is very knowledgeable on kind of the whole gamut of the ovulating years, we really want to hone in on starting off well. So we're going to focus in during kind of that adolescent time, which I know Emily and I have talked about before on the podcast, but we really want to bring in Dr. Briden's expertise here to kind of grow in our knowledge and understanding of how our body kind of turns on its ovulation cycle, and then what healthy patterns we will observe during that time. What are some signs and symptoms that things are going well and that we're maturing during that maturation process, because it doesn't happen overnight. It takes some time. And then the importance of setting that time, having that time go smoothly and go well and be healthy in order to set us up as females for the whole of our reproductive years, a whole of our ovulating years, to be doing that well and having healthy ovulatory cycles, and then subsequently having healthy menstrual bleeds during that time. So, Dr. Briden, before we jump into that topic, maybe you can just give our listeners a little bit of background for those of you that don't know you, which would be Emily and I are like, who does not know Dr. Briden? But if you don't know Dr. Briden, kind of who you are, what you do, and how you got into this kind of niche field of doing naturopathic medicine specifically for women's health.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, you guys can just call me Lara. That's easy. Yeah, so I started out in general practice, naturopathic medicine, but my journey to women's health specifically, which is funny you'd say niche, because it is 50% of the population, so it's not really. And yes, I mean, I treat periods and reproductive hormones and issues, but that's, in a way, that means treating the whole female body, because this is who we are. And it's only now, from the sort of arc of my 30-year career looking back, I realized, I started focusing on women because that women is who was coming to me, and because they weren't being served elsewhere. This is back in the 90s. They were just off. It's not that different now, but they were just offered the pill or surgery. That was pretty much it, or fertility medication, IVF. That was like the end of what they were being offered, and they wanted alternatives. So I was pleased that some of the naturopathic principles that I'd been taught could work really well for the female body, of course, no surprise. But going back even further, my work has been influenced by my early years. Before becoming a naturopathic doctor, I worked as a biologist studying sex differences. And so I recently had a chance to go back and read a couple of my papers from back then, expecting them to be terrible. But I recommend everyone do that. Actually, if you're in your 50s, go back, like trust your 20 something self. You're not maybe as silly as I wasn't as stupid as I thought I was back then. I read these papers and I thought, wow, I was writing about studying, like researching and writing about sex differences and really focused on centering female physiology as like the normal version of physiology and then male, the quirky variant. I mean, of course, it just depends on your focus. Both sexes are normal, obviously, but like we have for so long been in this thing, well, the male is the default and then women have this like quirky thing going on. But I've liked to sort of reframe it. Normal human physiology is cyclic through the reproductive years, and male is a quirky, they make their hormones every day. It's like very strange. So, I mean, that's sort of my backstory. And obviously I'm just very excited about female physiology, and I've enjoyed my opportunity to work with so many different women over the years and hear all their stories. There's really no substitute for that, to that like frontline, actually getting to hear what's actually going on with people, having an opportunity to help people try different treatments and see what works for them. And so it was obviously out of all of that 25, almost 30 years of clinical practice that I wrote a few books based on that experience.
Yeah. And not only your books, your blogs. I mean, I'll link to her website in the show notes, but she just has so much great information for people who have questions about, cycles. Mm-hmm. So let's just, from your perspective, Emily and I have talked about this before on the podcast many times, but let's kind of frame for the listener what it is we're talking about. So we say a menstrual cycle and we say, the adolescent years. When I am talking to people about it, I usually try to explain to young girls. So at a certain point, around 11, 12, 13, your body is basically a system is turning on. An entire system in your body is turning on. And that is it takes a lot to turn it on, and it takes a lot to get it functioning correctly. It's like turning on a whole plumbing system in a house. Mm-hmm. It doesn't always work well within the first 5 minutes. It takes some time for things to get moving, figure out what's going where, things have to communicate with each other. And the body's the same way because the brain is having to talk to the ovaries, and it's setting up this whole system of communication that's going to last you for a couple of decades. And so it takes some time for that to mature. So maybe you can kind of expand upon that and kind of lay out the groundwork for physiologically, what is it we're talking about during those adolescent years as girls are preparing for ovulation?
Yeah, I love that analogy of like turning on a system. I was just thinking about that. It is a system, and it's a system that's also sensing its environment. So plumbing system, but maybe is more like if it's tuned into the thermostat, it needs to know the thermostat inside and outside. It's got like all these feelers because as it's turning on the system, the body is constantly checking in, is like, okay, how is this gonna be? How much food is there coming in? How safe are we? Like, what is the situation? Because basically, I mean, it's all about the body deciding whether it's safe and able to make a baby. And that's true, obviously, even if you don't want a baby. I mean, this is how it works. So through that lens, it makes sense that the brain needs to be convinced that it's safe, that there's enough to eat, that there's, everything's going well. There's no illness or anything that might make it a bad time to attempt to activate that system. But of course, we do always talk about periods in the sense of, to girls, we're like, this is how you can make a baby one day. But I guess even though obviously that is true, I think for younger women, girls and women, it sort of makes more sense to frame it as this is how your body works. Like the entire body is calibrated around this hormonal system, these ovulatory cycles. You used the word earlier. Everything else is kind of calibrated to that. And we know that intuitively for boys, right? Like we totally get, when they, at a certain age, they need their testosterone to kick in. That's going to affect their muscles, their brain, their bones, like everything. Obviously that's their whole system is sort of depending on that, their mood, their everything. But that's sort of been disconnected for women to a large extent. And I do blame that on hormonal birth control. We can cycle back to that. But there's been this sort of attitude that this system kicking in is to some degree like optional. I mean, no one has said it's like, everyone agrees it's important that girls enter puberty, but it's not just, can you achieve puberty and start this process? It's like valuing the calibration of the whole system, which is what you talked about, like turning the system on. Actually, some of what the research suggests is it takes probably about 12 years to fully mature like the hormonal system, the communication between the brain and the ovaries, and the brain calibrating itself to its environment, and to be able to calibrate and have the word I love is robust, like a robust ovulation, robust luteal phase, which I'm guessing your audience, if they're charting, they know all about this. But, in the first couple of years of cycling, girls aren't going to have a lot of luteal phases. Their estrogens come online, their ovaries are trying, like they're pumping out some estrogen, they're trying it out, but they're not, at least for a little while, they're not likely making it all the way to ovulation very often. And that just speaks to the calibration process they have to undergo. It's also hard to make progesterone. Yeah.
You're really highlighting some important things. So one of the big issues I see, and I'd like to hear your thoughts too, is that this is somewhat of a tumultuous, and I know that's an intense word, time for the young girl as she's going through this period. And what is so, I think, tumultuous about it is because it's actually normal that things are not always 100% predictable and the same from day to day, week to week, cycle to cycle in the beginning when things are being established. And I think just the lack of that, knowledge, that base knowledge that, you're not going to ovulate every cycle on day 28 or day 14. You won't always have 28-day cycles. Your progesterone's not going to be as high as it should be, or your estrogen's going to be this level. Like that, there's so many expectations that, okay, I go through puberty, I start my period. Now I should just have like clockwork 28-day cycles and it should look like this. And then we're taking our daughters because they're complaining or there's something quote unquote irregular about their pattern. And then they're put on the birth control pill to try to regulate it. And that is like my biggest, I guess, pet peeve or like cry from the rooftops is like, it is normal to some extent to have certain irregular patterns during this time because the body is working itself out. And I like your thermostat analogy. That makes a lot more sense than the plumbing one, actually. But like, we have to let it run its course. So maybe you can speak to that concerned adolescent, the concerned mom of the adolescent who's like, well, things aren't predictable all the time. Well, that's actually okay.
It's actually, I mean, not to overstate it or use, I'm trying to think of the right word to use that is just really connected to my authentic feeling on the matter. I honestly think it's heartbreaking to put young teens on hormonal birth control. Like it actually makes me want to cry because, I mean, if you just think about it, like their body is trying to calibrate and as you say, kind of switch on this very important system that they're going to need for a few decades, whether or not they have babies. I mean, it's obviously very important for that side of thing, but even if they think they're never going to want babies, I mean, they still want a hormonal, and I guess the analogy, I mean, I know like our topic is not hormonal birth control, but it's hard to not talk about it. Like, it's hard to not talk about it because the analogy some of your listeners might have heard me say before, it's like, can you imagine? Like if, we said to boys, ooh, your testosterone's kicking in. It was like, ooh, that must be uncomfortable. Like, how does that make you feel? Look, let's give you a medication that switches that off. And don't worry, because you don't really need it. You don't need to need it until you're ready to make a baby. Like it just makes no sense at all. Like you would never do that to boys. And yet, so yes, but I forget what your question was, but like, yes, the girl, okay, right. Back to your question of expectations around like, what should a 13-year-old, what should that look like for her? And of course it does get very nuanced because sometimes they're not 13, sometimes they're like 11. And, sometimes there's legitimately distressing things going on, like very heavy flow. It's not that uncommon in those years, or like quite painful, or like strong mood symptoms as their hormone, especially as estrogen kicks in. And there could even in some cases, be early signs, and we can talk about how to differentiate that, but like in early signs that there is going to be some kind of problem like PCOS, which is we can talk about that a bit, but this is like where I've dedicated a lot of my work to trying to, like, on the one hand, acknowledging these symptoms can be real and girls shouldn't have to suffer. Like, no one is thinking girls should just put up with it. Like, of course not. But like, what are some other ways that we can make this easier for them so they don't experience distressing symptoms while they're maturing and their bodies? Because a lot of these, even like the heavy periods, I gave that example, a lot of girls will outgrow that. And again, I'm not saying they just suffer it in the meantime, but like the reason that's happening is exactly what we just talked about. So they're potentially, well, not potentially, they are making estrogen. They're quite sensitive to it because they're new to it, very stimulating to the uterine lining. And their progesterone is likely just not coming online yet at all because ovulation is not happening. Progesterone is the period lightening hormone. So you're following this, right? Like, so of course they're going to have, it's quite analogous to perimenopause, which we talked a little bit about off air, but like these are the two bookends of it. They're parallel. So in first puberty and puberty, estrogen comes online first. You get all this unopposed estrogen. Progesterone takes a while to kick in. And then in perimenopause or second puberty, progesterone goes away first. Estrogen stays there for a while, kind of being erratic and causing some havoc and causing very heavy periods. So the two populations you get, like the two groups of women who can get those crazy heavy periods, are 13-year-olds and 45-year-olds. And I mean, it's kind of a similar mechanism in both. So yeah, so girls will fortunately usually outgrow that. But in the meantime, there's obviously strategies to lighten flow and reassure them too. I think part of what you're talking about is some reassurance for them that they don't have to, it's okay if they're not, well, we would never expect a 13-year-old to have a 28-day cycle. Like that would just be very unusual at that age. I mean, the normal cycle length for in the first, few years of periods is up to 45 days. They have a longer follicular phase. Even when they do like start to ovulate, the duration, that it's just this long follicular, it's this long runway to ovulate. It takes a while to get there. Does that track with what because I guess you guys might be seeing charts of girls.
Yeah. Well, and I think again for the people listening is having that understanding of the physiology, and you can go back to listen to other episodes that Emily and I have done about the brain is literally trying to communicate to the ovaries, and the ovaries talk back to the brain. So it is this channel that's trying to be established. And that's why that maturation process is so important and really letting it play out. And to your point, Dr. Briden, like with a general awareness, which is what I hope to give the listeners, is like, here are the general parameters of like what's normal, and then here's what's not. And there are solutions to what's not kind of maturing normally that are not shutting down the whole system. We want solutions that identify, okay, what's happening in the system as it's maturing and developing. Yep. And where do we go in and kind of, it's like the thermostat, the plumbing analogy, like what pipe is a little off that needs tightening, or what thermostat's a little off that needs adjusting. Like that's how we address those issues. We don't go in and say, oh, you're having heavy bleeding. Well, here's a pill. Let's just shut the whole system down. It's like, no, the system was just turning on. This is not the time to shut it down. So yeah, maybe Emily, if you want to jump in here, feel free to talk.
You mentioned, reassurance. I think the reassurance that is necessary is for the moms because they want to help their daughters and they want to be able to give their daughters information. So often, I don't know if it's generational or, but perhaps just to kind of group moms of teens, in this age group of, there wasn't a lot of information for moms of teenagers right now when they were going through this. It was the birth control pill. That was the only option. And so I think that the moms at this stage of teens, they want better for their daughters. They're still digging and learning. And so it's kind of consoling and encouraging for the mom and giving them the tools in their toolbox to give the information to their daughters saying, hey, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. This part is normal. This isn't. I just think there's a lot of there's not as much confidence for moms, and that's the need, I think, for them to feel secure for their daughters, because they really want they want to help their struggling daughters, you know?
Yeah. And just as you're talking, I'm thinking this, the generation of women that are now finally able to do this. I mean, they like previous, a century ago, hopefully that was happening to some extent. But then we have come through this era, I call it the era of the contraceptive medication, where, yeah, female physiology was sort of just put in the too hard basket and routinely shut down. So I guess but what I'm saying is hearing you talk about that, if the mothers now that can communicate that value of ovulatory cycles, of trusting the body, of nurturing a healthy ovulation and regular natural cycle, could be the beginning of like an intergenerational. This could then be something that their daughters can pass on, right? Like I think if it collectively as a community, if we start valuing ovulatory cycles, and which is equals exactly valuing female physiology, human physiology, then that is something that can carry on. It's like part of what I feel is like I've been part of, and is like we're reclaiming. This is how the female body works. This was never a pesky thing to be shut down. This is like quite central to, and I'll just say again, long-term health, not just making a baby, but yeah, long-term. Like we know, like the obvious thing would be long-term bone health. So everyone knows like a girl needs to get her period and have somewhat, regular, not 28 days, but have somewhat regular periods to achieve that peak bone density, which is, that's mainstream, that's well established. But I would say the same principle applies to good metabolic reserve in like the cardiovascular system and the brain, and sort of all this healthy bringing online and exposure to estrogen and progesterone in these in teen years, and then 20s and then 30s. That's all actually protecting, what then happens later in their menopause and after menopause. I mean, I know that's decades away and the girls themselves aren't going to be thinking about this, but I'm just saying this, like what happens to them now is going to potentially have a huge, benefit much later in their life. It's so one of the ways I do talk to girls, patient, like which is my stepdaughter, and then young patients I've had, I don't bring in all that, oh, it'll help you when you're menopausal or any of that. But like I do talk about how it makes them stronger. Like, and that's actually very scientifically based, that, estradiol, ovarian estradiol coming online helps build not only bones, but muscle. It's really good for the brain. It sort of boosts good levels of neurotransmitters. It's maturing other bodily systems, right? And progesterone then the same. Progesterone is very good for the immune system. It helps to regulate the immune system to potentially protect against autoimmune diseases, for example. So, I mean, just from a girl's perspective, especially I'll just give one, if any parents listening, mothers listening if their girls are in sport, I will just say like this framing of ovarian hormones are actually really good for sport. Like they're not, and this is directly trying to counteract. Historically, it was like this sort of, well, once you get your period, it's best just to take the pill to not have to deal with your period when you're dealing with like swimming matches or whatever. That's one way to see it. But when you look at the actual research and how beneficial ovarian hormones are to performance, and as soon as you explain that to a young athlete, she's like, right, I want to ovulate. I want to have natural cycles and harness the benefits of that for my, sport. And the same would be true for like healthy mood and just, yeah, general wellness.
Right. So let's talk, let's start in the brain. So what happens?
Yep.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we know 100% what kickstarts puberty, like what actually gets the system turned on. There's theories, but no one knows for sure.
Right. You mean like the actual initiating event?
Right.
That's a very good question. I mean, certainly there's actually one interesting thing I will say that's just worth mentioning is there's two kind of parallel parts to puberty going on at the same time. This is one is what's called the adrenarche, which is the adrenal glands, like the androgens, that kind of testosterone type hormones kicking in girls as well as boys. And that's where you get like, a bit of body odor and some pubic, like underarm hair and stuff starting up. That's interestingly, even though we tend to think of that as synonymous with puberty or the brain ovary communication, that's actually the brain adrenal communication, and it's happening alongside. the brain ovary communication. And then, yeah, in terms of like what's the initiating event, I'm assuming it's something, it's just that reaches a critical mass, like the ovarian follicles just become active to a certain point that it kicks it into gear.
Right. And someone,
Yeah.
I think I read something about, GnRH and that some part of the hormone and then kickstarting the GnRH kind of pumping.
Pulsatility. Yeah.
Yes, the pulsatility of
Yes.
that.
So
Yeah.
that's the hypothalamus. It's actually, I mean, for anyone who's a little more science-minded, it's actually quite a beautiful system. It's like a Morse code. It's sending out this little
Mhm.
boop, but like it's the frequency of it. You have to have just the right frequency. If it's going too slowly, that's like, ooh, like no, your ovaries won't kick in because that's basically hypothalamic suppression. That'd be like undereating or like overtraining or stress, or which can happen at any age, but at a young age is the understandably the whole system is much more sensitive to that. It's much more like trigger. It'd just be like, okay, no, we don't. The ovaries better be quiet because we're not getting the right. But from the hypothalamus, that pulsatility, if it's so that's hypothalamus is part of the brain. If it's too slow, ovulation can't happen. If it's too fast, that's actually the classic feature of polycystic ovary syndrome, which is, or PCOS. We should talk about it because this is,
Yeah.
it affects one in 10.
Yeah.
It's actually becoming a lot more common, not only commonly diagnosed, that's part of what's happening, but it is legitimately becoming more common. And so
Can we get to that in just a second? Let's kind of continue down the body.
Yeah.
So GnRH is pumping, it's pulsing. Let's say
Yeah.
we want it to be pulsing at this ideal rate. Okay. So it
Yeah.
starts pulsing. And then what is it pulsing and who is it pulsing to? Who's it communicating with?
Yeah. The next one down, still in the brain, the pituitary.
Okay.
And yeah.
So it's
And
pumping to the pituitary
it makes
gland.
hormones that pulse as well. So yeah. Yeah. So that would be FSH and LH. People might have heard of those.
Yeah.
And they're both talking to the ovaries in slightly different ways, but the FSH is saying to all the little developing eggs, it's like, let's go. Let's do this. Let's like wake up. And as soon as they are recruited, as they say, and it's not just one, like, I think, a dozen or so will be recruited, but then eventually, obviously, as they progress, one of the eggs or follicles in the ovaries becomes the dominant one. And then it suppresses the others if all's going well. And then it starts pumping out a lot of estrogen and other hormones as well that kind of feed back and interact with the brain. Progressing to, it's actually the progression to ovulation has lots of steps, which involving this very intricate like dance between that dominant follicle and the brain. And then it's become a feed forward, like it just amplifies, and then finally the egg is released. And after the big surge, there's a big surge in estradiol, our main ovarian estrogen. That's the pre-ovulatory surge. A lot of women feel really great when that's happening. You get like a surge in androgen, like testosterone, as well as that surge in estradiol. It lasts just a few days. Some women and girls might experience symptoms associated with that, but we could talk about troubleshooting that. But many women just feel quite great during that time, quite very outgoing.
And you might also
that's one thing I will say, just from my position post med. Yeah.
No, go ahead, Dr. Briden. Go ahead.
Yeah, you might also feel. Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say.
I was going to say
like,
you might
my
also feel just
listening
interested in the other
those
sex
of us.
too during that time. You might feel just more attracted to boys
Yeah.
at school. They might
But
just look a little bit cuter.
Sure. It's actually just associated with like a general more outgoingness, like just like a suppressed appetite, just wanting to go out and do things. So there is, I'll just point out, like from my position, number of years past menopause now, that's the part I miss. I do miss those few days, that window of, I'm ovulating, like, everything just feels like kind of sparkly and like, just, so yeah. And so then if they manage to ovulate, and like we said, like when they're first starting out, girls might not get there, and that's okay in those early years, and then a couple of years, and then that empty sac where the egg was, I'm sure your listeners probably know this already, but like that, it converts to a temporary endocrine gland that's like amazing. It's sort of it grows to I think almost 4 centimeters in just like a couple days. Like it goes from just like unicellular to almost microscopic to like a structure. It's
The
quite
corpus
astounding,
luteum,
actually.
right?
Yep, the corpus luteum, and it produces huge amount of progesterone, like way more progesterone than estrogen, and it only lasts 2 weeks. If it's healthy, it'll last 2 weeks, and then if it's not rescued by the pregnancy, basically rescued by the early sort of hormone, like pregnancies, hormones associated with implantation, it will it's done. It will just like shrivel
Atrophy.
up, and yep, and
And yeah.
that's the end of it.
And that
And
signals to the body that you're going to have a menstrual bleed then after that.
yep,
Right.
progesterone will plummet at that point. Both estrogen and progesterone go down, and then that will trigger the shedding of the uterine lining. And a couple things I want to point out here that sort of, because a lot of people are quite familiar with, I would imagine, the basic, what we've just described. Two things just to help with understanding. It's really normal, like it's classic, actually, it's healthy for both estrogen and progesterone to be low during those first few days of the cycle, right? So like the end of the corpus luteum and the progesterone dropping, that's the bleed, and then you start counting day 0 or day 1. And during those first few days, if you were to do a blood test on like a young woman with the healthiest, most robust, like beautiful hormones, her hormones are at menopausal levels at that point. That's just the reason I'm mentioning it is there's just sort of seems to be sort of confusion around estrogen deficiency. Like at certain times in our cycle, we have very, very low hormones, and that's perfectly normal. The other thing, clarification around that whole system is like it's not unusual. How to phrase this? We talked about how the end of the corpus luteum, up in progesterone, is the bleed. That's true, but that's not the only thing that can trigger a bleed. So you can still get bleeds, even somewhat regular bleeds, even if there has not been ovulation. Those are called anovulatory cycles, and that's quite important to understand. Of course, like so many things in my work, it came from a conversation with a patient. She was just like, well, I thought if I had a bleed, I must have ovulated because otherwise, how would I have a bleed? It's like, oh, okay. No, you can have a bleed without having ovulated. It's just, it happens if if there's estrogen around, the uterine lining will build up, and at some point it will just let go. So this is where charting can be, I mean, I'm a fan, obviously, to chart temperatures and confirm that there has been a proper luteal phase. And also for context, the occasional anovulatory cycle or cycle where you did not ovulate, did not see a temperature rise, did not have a luteal phase, did not form a corpus luteum, did not make progesterone, it's pretty normal for even the healthiest women to have 2 or 3 of those a year. So, I mean, that also gives people observing one anovulatory cycle doesn't prove anything bad necessarily. It's only if that's consistently what's happening. Then obviously that can be a sign.
Are there a number
That's
of things that could cause that, or is that just normal reproductive life?
Well, okay, so there's this beautiful paper. You guys might like it. So obviously my colleague Geraldine Pryor, I'm sure you might know some of her work. She's a reproductive endocrinologist. She's just been a champion for ovulation, progesterone. I was just reviewing it for a book that I'm writing currently. She wrote a whole paper on hypothalamic suppression, which is so hypothalamic amenorrhea. People might know that term. That's like you're not having periods at all because the brain has perceived something is wrong. Usually it's undereating or overtraining or illness or stress. But she points out, and this is totally obvious now that she said it, there's all degrees of that. So and this is just part of this calibration, like the thermostat, right? So as we're going through life or, our lives, and the body's just constantly going, is it okay? Is it a safe time to make a baby? It's like, ooh, like, I'm not sure what's going on right now. It's like, I think I'm not going to ovulate this cycle. I just need to like figure out what's happening before we commit to this. It's this constant. So this would be, just a stressful year, like during university exams or something, and the next cycle might be anovulatory, right? Like there often be a bit of sometimes a lag time. It's not always in immediate real time. So sometimes if my patients have had an anovulatory cycle or even or missed, or more in a more severe case, missed, not missed, but, had a very delayed cycle, I would say, what was happening, 2 to 3 months ago? Like what is your body processing or thinking about here? So, I mean, that's one explanation, but then of course, like there are potentially hundreds of reasons to not ovulate, right? Like, so there's the functional reasons. It's like just, oh, it's stress, there's not enough food. That's just something the body's actively responding to. But then, I mean, then there's all the reasons of, oh, there could be something wrong. Like there could be, if there's even just things like if there's a problem with the thyroid or celiac disease or like all, and those don't even seem directly related to female hormones, right? But anything like that, or like a strong nutrient deficiency of any nutrient could impair ovulation. So it really is about, if ovulation is not happening, then it's putting on the detective hat. It's like, what does the body need? Like, what is going on here? What is the body not happy about? And I mean, other closer to more sort of female hormone things would be high prolactin. Some people listening might have had someone who that was the reason for not ovulating, or very commonly polycystic ovary syndrome, which we can circle back to.
Let's circle back to that. I want to touch on two things before we start to get into maybe some abnormalities that we should be looking for during the adolescent years and corrective things for those. And how we can empower patients to, advocate for themselves. So let's go back to, so we kind of laid out, what a cycle is. So starting in the brain, and this is, again, I really love to emphasize, ovulation starts in the brain. It's this whole thing from the head to the ovaries back up to the brain. Because sometimes we really just focus on like what's below the belly and above the knee is like, this is where everything's happening. And it's not, to your point, right? Like the sensitivity of stress, how our brain is perceiving reality in life, nourishment, activity, whatever it is, that it's going to start here in our brain to communicate to our ovary. So it's, it's kind of like, it's not the ovary's fault. It's the ovary is receiving whatever message it's receiving from the brain. So anyway, just to kind of keep reemphasizing that during this episode and this conversation. Okay, so we said, we need estrogen and we need progesterone. And during the adolescent years, again, because of this maturation process, those hormones are getting worked out, right? The engine's starting. So we're having estrogen rise. We're going to eventually lead to an ovulation event where hopefully a good corpus luteum is formed, and then you get progesterone. So Dr. Briden, let's talk a little bit. You've alluded to it somewhat already. Why do we need estrogen, and why do we need, the yin and the yang? Why do we need estrogen, and why do we need progesterone? And why is it not good to have just one of those things? Why do we need them in the ovulation years? And why do we need them? My understanding is we need them here because we're not going to have them for the whole of our life. So it's setting us up for good health later.
Yeah, it builds that concept is about building metabolic reserve, like sort of establishing like the physiology of many organ systems with the sort of eventuality that we do, and that's another topic, but menopause is a low hormone state. It's not a zero hormone state actually, but it's a lower hormone state that I would say, designed to do. But yes, so we want those hormones during the reproductive years, whether that's from regular monthly cycles or from a pregnancy. I'll just point out, very often you'll hear like one of the critiques, or sort of it's almost used as a justification for hormonal birth control, which really irks me, because it's like, they'll be like, well, our ancestors never used to have so many periods because they were pregnant or breastfeeding all the time, which is true. But I'll just point out, pregnancy is a huge source of those hormones. So like we can make them on a monthly cycle, which is how many of us through our lives probably make the majority of it. But depending on how many pregnancies you have or don't have, pregnancy is a huge source of those hormones and potentially gaining the benefits from them. So estradiol has got all the attention. I mean, its benefits are quite well known. Like I mentioned, its benefits on bone health are like solidly Everyone's in agreement on that. So bone is always the place to start because there's no dissenters. Like there's no clinician or scientist who thinks that estrogen is not important for bone. I'll just point out progesterone is also important for bone. So Geraldine Pryor, who we mentioned earlier, has a couple of scientific papers about that, demonstrating how progesterone is also important for bone. She builds the case that in every tissue, like bones, cardiovascular, brain, progesterone, she talks about them like she has an image of them holding hands, like estrogen and progesterone work together. It's just how the body's calibrated. Like the body is expecting to get them together. I mean, on a cyclic basis, not necessarily in the same moment, although during pregnancy, there would be a lot of both of them at the same moment. But it really is, I think we're designed or calibrated to have them both. And although estrogen has been really, like I call progesterone the Cinderella hormone. It didn't get invited to the party. It was purely just an accident of a historical, so many things in medicine, if you really look at it, it's like, it's just a comedy of errors. Like it's just sort of whatever sequence of kind of, in this case, estrogen was discovered before progesterone. Progesterone was sort of an afterthought. And actually the big thing that was the nail in the coffin for poor progesterone was that it couldn't be made very easily into a medication. And like estrogen could, even body identical estrogen could be made. Whereas progesterone was like, oh, that's too hard. So we'll just make these progestin analogs. I mean, this is sort of now veering back into the conversation about hormonal birth control, but like the synthetic versions of progesterone are nothing like progesterone, like just not even remotely the same. And yet through all these decades, there's been this very wishful thinking, and I would say completely mistaken thinking that, women the progestins, the synthetic progestins are good enough, and that we don't really need progesterone. And it's just, again, it's pretty heartbreaking. And I think we don't, if anyone's interested, I will just direct you to, if you could put this in the show notes. I mean, I did a interview Instagram Live with she's a brain researcher, Sarah Hill. She shared some of her thoughts about progesterone, the missing progesterone. And just as an example, this might be interesting to you, it quite illustrative. She said that young women on hormonal birth control who will, as a result, have no progesterone, are more likely to crave alcohol because progesterone, I mean, the way she explained it is, progesterone normally works on our GABA system in our brains. So it's actually quite naturally, quite calming, regulating for the nervous system. Actually, she makes the case it's actually hugely important for the brain, and not just like in the moment when you have it, but like developing the brain and maturing the brain, and that being without it is, potentially contributing to sort of an anxiety, or the example she gave was, craving more alcohol, which when she said that, I had this like penny drop moment. Like I was like, I think that makes sense to me through my biologist lens, through my clinician lens. And right. So I hope that answers the question. I mean, there's a lot, progesterone's doing a lot that has been just not even acknowledged or thought about. Yeah. So hopefully future generations, the purpose of a conversation like this is future generations of girls and women will get to have their progesterone back and see how that feels.
Right. Right. That it feels good to have both working together, estrogen and progesterone. Yeah. Were you going to say something, Emily?
I was just going to say exactly what you did, which is they can feel good. I mean, that's the whole idea.
Yeah. You sleep better. It also helps with your sleep too, to have good progesterone. Okay, great. So we need those for our immediate health and our long-term health, to your point, because we just know, like in the adolescent years, you're not thinking about, in decades from now, when I'm not having a period anymore, I'm going to need these hormones. Instead, we're trying to sell you on why you need them now. And if you want to be an athlete, a young athlete, you just want to be healthy, if you want to feel good, you want to have energy, be with your friends, etc., you just want to have these good hormones kind of going through your body. So, all right, let's pivot a little bit to what are some things that are kind of like red flags. So we know the system is turning on. We understand that there's going to be some cycle irregularity. You already highlighted the fact that Emily and I have talked about this before, that having a 45-day cycle, which again, for those that are listening, starts with the first day of a bleed and ends before the day before the next bleed. So that whole time period, we could look up to about 45 days, that can still be considered a normal, healthy pattern during these adolescent years. And so what would be some things that are not normal or not healthy, kind of the flag where we do want to be seeking some type of a treatment or a medical professional who can help us address the underlying reason why we're having this symptom, because the symptom is a little outside of the range of normal. I know you always talk, I've heard you talk about many times, Dr. Briden, about, you should not be missing life because your period is so painful. Like you should not be hunched over. This is not normal,
No,
So
we
maybe
can talk about
starting
pain.
at the bleed and kind of however you want to move into that aspect of the conversation.
Well, let's start with the regularity and then kind of move into the bleed and the mood symptoms, the pain. So on the one hand, no one needs a cookie cutter 28-day cycle. Like that expectation is unrealistic for a woman of any age. And as we said, it's actually the standard. So, for teens, they will even it would be very unusual to have a 28-day cycle. Their cycle is longer. At the same time, I've also heard in some circles, not from you guys or anything, but I've also heard sort of the other end. It's like, oh, whatever's normal for them, like any length of cycle is normal. It's like, that's not true either. So, I mean, there are some parameters of what's healthy, like what's a sign. It's really all comes back to the question, is ovulation occurring? Reasonably regularly. That's how we make hormones. So regular ovulation is how women make hormones. So, I guess, I mean, in terms of regular, so obviously there'd be the whole question around if signs of the adrenarche, or the puberty, female puberty is coming too early. That'd be a podcast all its own. But I mean, there's some ranges of normal, and the range of normal is pretty wide, actually. Girls can start getting signs pretty young. I think the youngest at the moment, what they consider for the actual age of the first bleed, would be anywhere between sort of 9 and 16. So, but there'll be signs before that, obviously. So, I mean, if it's outside, if there's an early puberty, that's a topic for another day. If there's no period at all by 15 or 16, that would be figure out what's going on, and that could be lots of possible explanations. So that's when the doctor does have to work through, all the different things.
And again, as Dr. Briden, as you just said, let's try to figure out what's going on. Really try to figure out what's going on, because something is going on. Just like we talk about women who are trying to achieve pregnancy and they're diagnosed with infertility. Infertility is a symptom of an underlying cause. So in this case, not having a period starting in the right time frame is a sign that something's off with the system. So let's find what's happening with the system, again, to try to encourage people. Don't take the Band-Aid approach that will likely be offered of just a pill, but figure out what's going on.
Yeah. If you just think about it, I mean, just one more word about hormonal birth control. If you think about it, the total failure in logic with irregular periods, the problem is that ovulation is not happening. So then the proposed solution is a drug that suppresses ovulation. It just from day one, it's this doesn't. I mean, okay, from day one, it was invented as contraception, which I'll just say, obviously it can do, but the whole thing of using it to regulate the period was just from day one, that was made no sense. But anyway, back to our conversation. So yeah, there's lots of ways to lose a period or not, lots of potential reasons to not get a period. So it does require troubleshooting, a combination of working with the doctor, usually, some blood tests very likely might be required to try to figure out, I'll just give a comment, and it's not common, but I'll just mention it again, an early sign of celiac disease in a young girl could be not getting her period or not getting regular periods. So, I mean, that would be, a marker of something not directly related to the ovaries, right? As you say, the ovaries are just the poor, bystanders in that, not able to do what they need to do because there's another problem. So yeah. And then I guess then we now have finally come to a little bit of differentiating polycystic ovary syndrome. So we did talk about how, depending on, obviously the age of first period is going to vary quite a lot, but then once the first period's happened, it should be reasonably regular within 2 years. I think sort of 2 years is the standard, like becoming more regular. There might be a period and then a few months gap, not another period, but then, over the next couple of years, it should start to come more regularly. And if you've got someone who's 3 years after her first period and she's still only having like 3 periods a year, that's not a good sign. That could be from undereating, or it could be like, that would be a classic early sign of polycystic ovary syndrome. And this is the state of having higher than normal testosterone, unfortunately becoming extremely common, for a combination of reasons, probably to some degree from environmental toxins in the which is really sad. But that might go along with, significant skin breakouts, especially like jawline acne and I want to say hirsutism, facial hair, body hair, but again, that does vary. Body hair does, it is affected by ancestry to some extent. So it's sort of, that has to be interpreted, carefully and in the context of what's happening. So,
and the environmental toxins point, I'm sorry to interrupt you. That's because the impact it has on our estrogen. Is that right? It kind of sends like a signal that makes our estrogen off.
I was just reading about this, partly for my book, partly thinking about talking to you guys today. So one of the examples that's out, it's a big topic, so obviously we won't get too far into it, but just had to give a concrete example. So people might have heard of phthalates, like in plastics. One of the mechanisms by which they can increase the risk of PCOS, and it's quite a substantial risk in the scientific literature, and again, exposure is often through no fault of people's own. Like, this is the thing, I don't want, women have enough to worry about and feel guilty about when they're pregnant. They can't, no one is blaming women for being exposed to something that's just in their food supply that through no fault of their own. But it's actually, if people want to know the mechanism, the phthalates actually suppress androgens. And in the in utero situation, if the female, there'd be different things happening for male fetuses, but like if the female fetus sort of in this low androgen environment will actually upregulate her own androgen exposure to kind of, again, it's a calibrating, right? So the baby's calibrating too. So we're always all the time like trying to calibrate with our environment. And so potentially you get this upregulated androgen production. Like it's very clear in the research that unfortunately now, some girls are just being born tending to higher androgens or testosterone. That's happening. And it's really concerning and sad because it does actually contribute to long-term health risks. And so, and then anyway, that's the environmental toxin part of it, but there's other factors too. Yeah. And then, so that testosterone, that high testosterone will not only cause, potentially facial hair, body hair, weight gain around the middle, although some thickening around the waist is totally normal as part of female puberty. I'll just point that out, actually. That's actually just one of the sort of phases of it. So again, that would be subjective, like in terms of how much, at what point is that a problem? And then just failure to ovulate, like just not being able to ovulate because of the testosterone, essentially, just not allowing that. And one thing that might help, that kind of ties into our maturation theme, all girls in that early phases of puberty are quite androgen dominant. Like we all, like both sexes, we have higher testosterone when we're younger, and then it decreases with age. But girls in particular, like around that, so just before the first period would be quite a relatively high testosterone time for everyone, even girls without a PCOS problem. And then what happens as part of the maturation, when the ovaries kick in properly and you start ovulating, the estrogen and progesterone, particularly from the ovaries, helps to push down on progesterone, on testosterone, push down on testosterone and help to normalize the brain ovary communication. I just heard, I was talking to a colleague, Fiona McCulloch, I'll just give her name because she's an expert on PCOS, another naturopathic doctor. She was just saying to me earlier today, it's like good progesterone production takes a chunk out of testosterone. Like it really does lower testosterone in a good way in the female body. So this is going, so failure to ovulate it becomes a vicious cycle because then you can't make the progesterone you need to lower testosterone to actually be able to ovulate. So this is where sometimes, that you'll require some intervention and you don't want to wait too long. So this would be of course, this is what mothers are nervous about. This is what parents are nervous about. Like, how long do I wait? When does this irregular cycle become a problem? And what does this skin symptom mean? And what is this? So it is true. So, I mean, my approach with especially younger teens would be give them some gentle supportive treatment because they want to clear up their skin anyway. So, give them some supportive treatment, make sure they're eating enough, make sure everything's, and encourage that regular ovulation. And then if that's just really not happening, then maybe go to the next level and start looking at some of the natural treatments for PCOS, which can work great, actually. So that would be things like, I'll just mention inositol because it's so popular. It's safe in teens. Absolutely. It's safe in pregnant women. Like, it's really like, I always feel like I'm doing an infomercial for inositol. Like, I don't sell it. I have no shares in it. It's inexpensive. It improves insulin signaling. It like lowers testosterone in women. And so promotes ovulation.
Right. So, right. It promotes ovulation, which is what we're trying to get to. So,
but only in the state where high testosterone is the reason girls aren't ovulating.
Okay.
Right. So anything like that, so this is, people are like, well, what can to be able to, like, what promotes ovulation? Is like, well, there's no one thing that works in everybody because it's about trying as much as possible to figure out what's interfering with ovulation. For a lot of young women out there, the thing they need to do to ovulate is to eat more, like way more, like just, I think a lot of young women just underestimate or don't realize how much food the female body actually needs.
And especially women that are active or young teens that are, I mean, they're playing a sport every season. They're doing, their body is just under so much physical exertion and stress. So they have to be consuming those calories and good calories, right? Good calories.
Yeah, like full meals. Like I'm a real like meat and potatoes kind of like they need a meal 3 times a day. And plus, so one of the things about intense exercise too is it suppresses appetite. So these girls can't necessarily trust their appetite. I know they don't really want to be told what to do, but like they especially if they're serious about athletics, I guess they need to have a coach who explains to them like you need to fuel for your sport. And the good coaches these days will be aware, like, okay, put it this way. If a girl loses her periods or starts getting more like spread apart periods, long cycles and ovulatory cycles, that's another way to see that. That's a sign that she's not fully nourished or fueling properly for her sport. So, I mean, just from a performance perspective, like it can be, it's bad to lose your period because you're not getting the hormones that you need to be healthy, but it's also a sign that you're not getting whatever it is you need to be healthy in general. So it's important to eat enough to do the sport that you're doing. So that's why one of my favorite quotes from Geraldine Pryor is regular ovulation is both an indicator and a creator of good health. So it's both. Yeah.
Right. And the irony, right, is you might think like, oh, well, not having a period, especially if I was an athlete or being a young girl, like it's somewhat convenient. And it's like, and I think this is true maybe in a lot of areas of health, and I would say in American experience of like just daily life, because I've worked with people in different stages of their health status and how your experience becomes normal, and like to think that it could be better, it's almost like unimaginable because you just get so used to where you're at. And even for girls, it's like, well, no, like I'm performing at this level or I feel this thing.
Right.
This is okay. This is as good as it gets. It's like, no, but like imagine if you had estrogen in your body and progesterone in your body, like it could be so much better. You could be jumping higher, running faster, lifting more, like doing more. So no, don't settle for what you think might be normal or even cycle patterns, right? Like, oh, well, I just always go 60 days in between having my period. It's like, well, we don't really want you to be going 60 days between having your period.
Exactly. That's what I mean by that's not like normal for them. That's not a thing. Like that's a 60-day cycle means something's not right.
Right. Yeah. Something is off. And that's, that's where we really like to try to encourage young girls to, you don't have to like get super into I don't think anyway. And just knowing the population too, tracking and charting and being like on top of everything, but even just a general awareness of like, okay, I'm seeing my bleed. Here's what this bleeding pattern looks like. And then, oh, I start to see this cervical fluid and here's what this kind of looks like. And I'm roughly marking it on my calendar on my phone or something, just having a general idea of like the day span between the first day of your menstrual bleed and the day you see cervical fluid. And then when your cervical fluid stops and then the day before your next period, like, so we have some idea of where any type of abnormality may be or fluctuation in cycle pattern may be, can be really helpful. So
How often, just with you guys, with your charting, like the women who are charting that you're helping, like how many of them are using wearables? Because I mean, of course, you can use the armbands or the rings or the all various. I won't mention brand names here, but like there's different ways you could just be getting that like a steady flow of the BBT data onto your phone. Is that something people are doing? I mean,
I
yeah,
find that to be very common. And I
yeah,
think the majority of couples that I work with are trying to achieve pregnancy. And I
okay,
find that it helps them kind of cross-check, so to speak. It
yeah,
just sometimes more data can be a little bit more stressful, but sometimes it can also be a little bit more helpful and just
yeah.
kind of easier on the mind in a situation where everything feels out of control.
When I discourage temperature charting with my own patients is when they're not ovulating. It's like, well, it's like I know you're not ovulating anyway. So what's the point in trying to micromanage? Then they'll bring me these charts. It's like, what is all like they're looking at the I'm like, that's a flat chart. Like nothing's happened. So there's no point in trying to analyze these little tiny bumps. Like that's just you haven't ovulated. So then I'll say to them, don't chart, don't take any temperatures until you've had a couple cycles where you've actually had signs of ovulation happening. That would be for someone who's yeah, hasn't been ovulating and has to correct that.
And speaking of the wearables, because it is so common, I would just
Yeah.
like to say, wearables with actual charting is
Yeah.
very helpful.
Yeah.
Wearables without charting, they are data collectors, right? And so we
Yeah.
want to be able to see the signs and observations that we need to see in order to be able to interpret our fertility. So yeah, the wearables can be helpful. They can give you more information, but if you're really trying to get a good understanding of body literacy, you want to be doing some sort of natural charting, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Just one thing about the wearables. I mean, I don't know if you guys were around, like it was about 15 years ago, or whenever the first Apple Watch came out, like the first, they were like, you could just imagine the tech guys, right? It's like, oh, we can track like pulse rate and all these things, and they did not include like nothing about basal body temperature in women. I'm like, I was at the time, I was like, this is the most, I was like face palm, like this is the most obvious sign. Like the female body has the thing to track, and they just did, it wasn't even remotely on their radars, but they brought it in quickly. Like after there was a big outcry of like, why are you tracking everything else and not just the most obvious thing in the world? Um,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of us as the female population, we kind of too quickly accepted the birth control, the shutdown method of like, okay,
Yeah.
something's off. The person in the white coat's offering me this. It does seem to help my symptoms sometimes. There are women that feel quote unquote better with that type of method.
Oh, well, it can,
Plus, now I don't have to worry
yeah, it
about
can,
a bleed. Like, there's all these like positives. So I'll just kind of
oh,
go with
yeah.
that and just,
I
but
mean,
we didn't.
it can totally switch, like suppress symptoms. But I mean, fortunately, there's other ways. I mean, but at the cost of shutting down your entire hormonal system. So, I mean, I guess I like women to have the best of both worlds. I like them to have relief from symptoms. Everyone wants that, and still be able to make hormones, which is
Right.
in most cases is possible. I do understand there's always the outliers. Conversations like this, I've always like got in the back of my mind. Oh, there'll be that one person listening who's like, I've tried everything, but that's okay. So, I mean, there's a few people, even some of my own patients who, for example, are on the hormonal IUD. I think the interesting thing about the hormonal IUD, I'll just mention in this context, it does still permit ovulation, particularly in older women who have a robust cycle. So they could in some ways be getting the best of both worlds. They could still be making hormones, but not having period symptoms or something. But yeah, I mean, so that's kind of the segue into what about all the painful, super heavy bleeding? Um,
Perfect. Yeah, that's where I was going to
yeah,
go next. So in
yeah,
young
I
girls,
guess,
so the cycle
yeah,
length, we said that kind of in the androgen excess,
Yeah.
that could be a sign of
Yeah.
PCOS. So something to, again, cautiously, but still, firmly pursue corrective approaches to treating that. And then now your daughter or you as a young girl, you're having a lot of pain during your period.
Yeah.
And I still meet women in their 30s who have had pain for a really long time and they just bend over and take it every month with a ton of Tylenol. And it's like, that's not normal. Like, that's not normal. So let's talk about pain.
Okay. Right. Let's talk about pain. It's a big topic. Again, that could be its own full hour. So we'll give just a little teaser, like a brief conversation before we totally leave the conversation of irregular periods and PCOS. Though I have to say, I can't believe I didn't say this earlier. It's a cautionary. It's a public announcement, awareness announcement. The hormonal condition PCOS cannot be diagnosed by ultrasound. Like I just really need to put that out there because, just to be really clear, the young athlete who's lost her period from undereating / overtraining, and that's her main thing that's going on with her, could 100% have polycystic ovaries on an ultrasound. So polycystic ovaries, I've written about this at length. They're not cysts. They're not specific to PCOS. It's like, so this has been actually quite a big problem. And there's been a number of quite high profile articles saying it's like, okay, whoa, like pull the reins. We need to we cannot keep telling young women, like, based on this ultrasound, that's PCOS. True, like the situation is, it's always going to be associated with high testosterone, some evidence of high testosterone, not always clear on blood tests, and the failure to ovulate with, it has, I'm actually writing that section in my new book right now, like how to sort of differentiate. But I would just caution people because you can, just one more on that, you can imagine what's happening. So you've got a young woman is having irregular and ovulatory cycles due to undereating. And then she's mistakenly told PCOS, and she Googles, and what is the treatment? The popular treatment for PCOS is to eat less or low carb or something. Imagine what's going to happen to her period. Like, she's just going to lose her period entirely. Like, I've probably had, it's not an exaggeration to say at least 50 patients where that's happened. Like, they've come to me, they've been through this process, and I said, you were actually going 180 degrees in the opposite direction from getting a period. So you can't, yeah. So this is if it wouldn't be so serious, I wouldn't be so like animated about it. If it wasn't, when it like actually comes down to it, the treatment for PCOS is actually the opposite in some cases of the treatment for undereating, obviously. So it's pretty important to not get that wrong. Yeah. So, but back to pain. I'm going to mention a colleague of mine down here. She's in Brisbane, so she's not New Zealand, but Dr. Peter Wright, she has a book about healing pelvic pain. I don't know if it's available in the States, but I think it is. Anyway, she really zooms out from, obviously endometriosis is part of the conversation around period pain and pelvic pain generally, but there's a lot more to it. And I would just, I would frame it as, like, broadly, I don't see, how to say this? Like, the onset of menstrual cycles and estrogen kicking in and all of that definitely plays a role in pelvic pain. Young children don't have pelvic pain the way menstruating girls or women do. But that said, it's not really the fault of the estrogen, right? Like, it's not a hormonal problem per se. It's how that activated whole system is interacting with gut health, the nervous system, immune health. Does that make sense to you guys, right? So very often the solution is in one of those other things. Very often if a woman with quite serious pain, her hormones look totally perfect. Like her temperature chart would be perfect. It's not a hormonal problem per se. It's like her body, and there's different pathways to get there. I think I saw some crazy, this is the stat. I think it's like 1 in 4 women have some kind of severe or persistent pelvic pain. Like, it's pretty serious actually when you think about it that way. So the main thing is, like we said this earlier, in no scenario is debilitating pain acceptable. So the girl needs something, like some kind of help. And I guess if I had to pick my top, I will just offer a couple of top 2 like things to try. And I'm not saying this is the whole solution by any means, but like just to give people like something. Obviously in my work, it's in my books. I mean, I would say try some time off cow's dairy. I know that's oversimplifying, and not everyone, it won't work for everyone, but it does seem to be a factor. And it's just to do with kind of a histamine reaction, sort of a prostaglandin, especially anyone who, when they were younger, like when they were a kid, had signs of dairy sensitivity, like recurrent ear infections or tonsillitis or something. This is if they're now having a lot of inflammation around their periods. I mean, to me, it's always just been quite a simple thing to try. Doesn't mean they're doing it forever, but they'd have to do it for a few months. But you could switch to, like, I talk about this in my writing, but like, it doesn't have to be, you could switch to like goat and sheep dairy, or like the dairy that doesn't have the inflammatory casein. And then the other very simple one that's actually been clinically trialed is zinc, because a lot of girls aren't getting enough zinc or iron. Those are the two top nutrients. They're both lost with menstruation. It's hard to get enough zinc at the best of times, especially if they're not eating meat. So this is where I'm a fan of like the meat and potato veggie kind of proper dinner. It was a relatively small trial. It was a clinical trial where they put, for period pain, they put a zinc supplement head to head with the birth control pill to see like which would work the best. And the zinc, they both did the same, like the zinc performed as well as the pill. And then in the description of that study, it just made me laugh out loud. They're like, and the advantage is, zinc's a lot less expensive than the pill. And I'm like, there's that. And also it doesn't shut down the hormonal system. So there's also that. So, zinc is, and just little caveats on that. Don't give it zinc on an empty stomach can cause nausea. So check with your like if the girl's on any other medication, obviously, like do all the normal things, like check with the pharmacist, make sure it's going to be safe, and take it with food and all those sorts of things. But this is what I'm talking. I'm just give those examples, not saying they're going to work for everybody, but just saying it doesn't have to be it doesn't necessarily always have to be a complicated or difficult thing to fix. I mean, sometimes my experience is teens can respond quite well, actually. And it's better to get it earlier. Everyone agrees on this. If there's pain, you want to get on top of it. I mean, and obviously there's nothing wrong with using Advil and like painkillers during the period as well. Like because the pain pathways get set up. This is another brain communication, right? Like once you get pain in the pelvis, it sets up this, like, does that make sense to you guys? Like you'll have this, learned pain almost. So it is important to not let a girl be in pain. I mean, no one wants to, so that's stating the obvious, but there's the solutions. Yeah.
I feel like
Right.
there's so
Missing
much
school. Yeah, there is so much. Yeah. Emily has her copy too, but like the Period Repair Manual is just a great source for anyone. I'll link it in the show notes. It's just got a lot of, for moms, for daughters, just a lot of really great kind of quick help remedies. You can try this, and she gives, good dosing suggestions, like, try magnesium at this time in your cycle and these different things. And I know I have found, I mean, just adding magnesium, adding zinc, like those little things really have helped kind of make my period a non-event, which has been amazing. So
and that's what you just said. I mean, this is the bar. Periods should not be inherently symptomatic. I know they are commonly symptomatic for a lot of people. And again, it's not because they're doing anything wrong specifically, but there's nothing about a menstrual cycle that should be difficult. It should just be, it arrived, flow, not too heavy. And the normal amount of flow is about 50 milliliters. So about 5 tablespoons, I guess, over all the days of the bleed, like, so for all the 4 or 5 days. So it's about the contents of one egg, which is, I guess, another way to sort of think about it. So it's good to kind of think in terms of volume. And back in the day, like when people were using menstrual cups, that was a really easy way to quantify. I will comment that I find period underwear, I mean, as great as it must be, like it's very popular, but it's hard to tell how much women are losing with period underwear, unfortunately. But it's good to think about what is normal, because now we're kind of moving into the heavy period side of things. But very heavy periods, it's depleting. It depletes the body of like zinc and iron. Obviously, it can cause iron deficiency, which can then cause anxiety, and it all sorts of. I was just talking with another expert, Dr. Libby Weaver. She was talking, and she's so right. Actually, she was talking about how it's just, if you just think about this, like how many women in general, but particularly young women and teens, are walking around iron deficient. And then you think about the fact that iron deficiency causes anxiety, and mental health symptoms. And it's just hard. Again, it's sort of heartbreaking to think, well, how many of those girls would, all they really just need is to get their iron up and to stop, lighten their period, get their iron levels good, and their mood, their life, everything could be transformed. It's it's hard to think that like one nutrient could be so transformative, but iron is probably in that category. It needs to be tested too. I'll just say iron. It's not just good enough to say, oh, hemoglobin on blood test is good enough. Like you need to have full iron studies to kind of see what's actually happening. Yeah.
And again, plugging the book, she does give really great, Dr. Briden really gives some great names of testing and like how to interpret those things, like things you want to be asking your doctor specifically for when you're coming across these issues. And it makes a lot of sense, which is why I'm particularly drawn to natural, holistic type of approach to medicine, is not because it's kind of frou-frou or non-scientific. It's very evidence-based. It's very much, here's how the body works. It's not working as it should. I wonder if we give it what it needs, if it will just do what it's supposed to do. And it turns out that that's oftentimes very true. Except in those cases when we have a serious, in this case, we could say like reproductive disease or disorder, like there's a severe endometriosis in there and we need some type of a surgical procedure to remove it,
Sure. Yeah. So just back to your comment about like when I first started working as a naturopathic doctor, like 30 years ago, I was working in a rural area in Canada. I'm Canadian. Obviously, people hadn't noticed. I don't have a Kiwi accent, New Zealand accent, but a lot of my patients were ranchers and farmers. And it was a really good entry point for me because they were working with animals. So they just like totally get it. It's like, of course, like it's like what you eat, what you feed to something is going to make a difference to their reproduction, their health, their mood, their everything. I mean, it's quite logical that way. And that's been a lot of my approach too, is that women's health, women's bodies, women's physiology is not as complicated or mysterious as we've been led to believe. Like it's actually quite a logical system, and it does respond quite well to having the right support. Like, as you say, like being fully nourished and
having the minerals we need and the rest we need, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay. So we covered irregular cycle patterns, pain, heavy bleeding. You touched on just a little bit there as well.
Yeah.
Anything else that you can think of as far as, kind of abnormalities during this time?
There's premenstrual mood, but we might have to circle back to that. I mean, it's once we get into all, I mean, for everyone listening, I mean, there's always my experiences after treating, thousands of women of, tens of thousands over the past few decades. In most cases, there's a solution. I mean, a lot of people I know there's always people listening thinking, oh, that might be true, but my case is more difficult, or my case is, but in most cases, even tough things like strong premenstrual mood symptoms can respond quite well to nutritional strategies, again, to like giving the body what it needs, potentially avoiding food sensitivities. It's a bit of an overlap in that I do feel like my experience has been that if there's a dairy sensitivity, avoiding cow's dairy can sort of help with mood and heaviness and pain, but it's not going to be the solution for every single person. And I will just point out, I'm also working on another book, which this time it's perfect timing with your request for this interview, because in this book on periods, I'm writing little sections for teenagers throughout. Like I've also drawn to teenage period health. I think because we talked a little bit off air before we started the interview, but this is where it all starts, right? Like if you can start a woman, like start her off, send her into the life doing well, like cycling regularly and having easy periods, that's just going to bode well for everything, not just fertility, but also, what sort of everything that comes later. It's part of building health. So
yeah. Which is funny because I've worked for a while. I'm not teaching directly right now, but similar to Emily, worked with a lot of couples who try to achieve a pregnancy, avoid a pregnancy. And I feel like I just don't even talk about having children anymore, which is not that that's not important to me. I find it very important for people, but I'm just so focused on but you just need to ovulate. Like I kind of don't care if you ever get pregnant, really. I just want you to ovulate. Ovulation is just so important for your whole body. It's just so important. It's a sign that everything is really working well. And, even though I keep drawing attention to the brain ovary connection, to everything that you said, Dr. Briden, it's like, But if that's not working and maybe there's something else in the body that's off, some type of an inflammation or a gut issue, immune health, that's going to interrupt that brain ovary communication, which is why we might be seeing those type of abnormal symptoms in the cycle.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, it's always important to look at those other systems because everything connects. It's kind of stating the obvious, but maybe we'll just finish with, before we came on started recording, I was sharing my thoughts a little bit about as of 2025, perimenopause is getting a lot of, it's an understatement to say a lot of attention. And what I've found is, as interested as I am, I mean, I have a book on perimenopause, and I've been through perimenopause, so I share the interest. I do think it's interesting, but what I've found quite jarring is this intense focus on the benefits of ovarian hormones for women over 45. And I'm like, well, what about all the women, the young women? Like, why are hormones suddenly important now when they never were before, seemingly because they could just be, routinely switched off with hormonal birth control. So that's part of what's driven my strong, just tying back to I want to go back and help young women and just really open up the conversation that, young women's bodies are logical. They know what to do if they're given the right support a lot of the time. They don't need to be kind of micromanaged by hormonal birth control.
And I don't want to close on kind of a, what is that called? Belating the point or berating the point.
Belaboring
yeah. But maybe we can just kind of wrap up with a little bit as to, typically we have, mom takes daughter into the practice and some issue and they're given the birth control pill. Maybe you can just make a brief case as to why we don't want to do that. Don't do that, mom. Why we don't want to do that.
Okay. So I think it might help people to consider, we've been locked in a paradigm. I mean, this is true for lots of things in medicine and in the world generally. We sort of, in every era of humans, I mean, there'll be a certain way of thinking about things. The medical paradigm for the last about 60, 70 years, it feels like forever, but it's not that long. Big picture, really only a few generations, has been women don't need their hormones. Basically it's we don't need ovulation. Women don't need ovulation until they're ready to make a baby. It's it's a value. It's just completely devalued the female hormonal system. So that's the paradigm. And I'm just in defense of doctors to some extent. I mean, this is the paradigm they were trained in. Likely have just never honestly considered that a young woman might benefit from ovulatory cycles in the, as we say, in the short term and the long term. I mean, it's just obvious. It's not even really on their radar. So, I mean, I even talk about this in my books, or at least, a couple of them. I get it. From the doctor's perspective, they're like, well, you came to me for period pain. I'm offering you something that, I'm trying to help you. And it's just a disconnect. They just have the goal of getting rid of the symptom, which is valid. But the goal we're talking about here, which is actually quite radical, is that young women should be able to have the right, as I say, the right to ovulate, the right to make their own hormones on an ongoing basis. And I would also offer that it's possible to do that and also not have symptoms. I mean, there are other strategies to bring on board. So, I think it's unfortunate that that's not usually going to happen in the doctor's office, but I mean, that'll change over time. I do think the paradigm is shifting, actually. I feel like finally, I've been in this 30 years, I feel like the seismic, something is kind of wobbling. I feel like more and more doctors are kind of maybe you're right about ovulation, just occasionally. But I mean, it's not that, and just in doctor's defense, there's a lot you could still, that still has to happen in the doctor's room. So this is why in my books I have how to speak with your doctor. So that you're not at loggerheads with them you just have to put it in their terms. It'd be like, okay, we talked about testing iron. Can you test my daughter's iron studies? Is she iron deficient? Because that's something the doctor can easily test, advise on. And then if this ovulation is not happening, you detected that by, charting, or just the fact that she's only having 4 periods a year, then, just questions for the doctor would be have we looked at what different, possible reasons for lack of ovulation? Have we ruled out celiac, or, if we just and if do you then you could even say do you think it's PCOS, or what do you think is actually happening here? And you can always put that back through the lens of well, potentially reading my book or my new book that's coming, and like just understanding. I mean, I know people don't want to have to do some of the medical thinking themselves, but like that is actually the reality we're in now. So it has to be sort of a collaboration between the doctor ordering tests and then the person sort of thinking about what that means. And a perfect example of that, I'll just say again, is that ultrasound please don't just accept at face value a PCOS diagnosis based on an ultrasound. I really can't overemphasize that. But that said, some young girls do have PCOS. So it's not, requires a bit of nuance.
Right. Yes, there's a lot of nuance. So, all right. Well, this has been really great. Thank you so much for all of your time, Dr. Briden. This has been really, really helpful. I'll link to a lot of those resources that you mentioned in the show notes, especially your books too.
Yeah.
And your blog. I find your blog to be so helpful. You have a ton of great information on the blog. So we'll definitely make sure to link to that too.
And I have a podcast, a solo podcast, my latest episode that I'm working on. I don't know when this one's coming out, but I'm working on one that's all about differentiating between like, why are you not getting a period? Like it's all about irregular periods. So that might be a good kind of follow-on chapter from our conversation today.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll definitely link to that in the show notes too. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay. So hopefully everyone has, gotten a lot out of this. I feel like we've given you good parameters to kind of keep seeking out more information, finding those corrective underlying causes of things. And we'll link to some of those sources that we know too. You know, if you're discouraged with your medical professional that you're working with, you're not getting good answers, and just try to encourage you to seek out someone else, get a second opinion. Thanks be to God, we have so much great like telehealth now too, which is available. So doctors even outside of your region, you might be able to connect with. So that could also be an option as well. But
And
thank you.
whenever you come out with the new book with the little teen blurbs, we would love to have you back. That would be so
I'll try to
fascinating.
send you, I'll make a note. I might try to send you a copy. It won't be out till next year, but I'll try to circle back to
We
you
would
guys.
love that. We look forward to that.
Definitely, I would love to promote that. Absolutely. That's so cool. I know I'm always throwing your name around whenever I'm giving presentations. That's a great resource.
Definitely.
So, yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Briden, for your time, and best of luck in all your endeavors. Thank you for all the work you're doing. I know you've helped Emily and I a whole bunch. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yep. Have a good night.
That wraps up another episode of the NFP Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found our discussion enlightening and empowering. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'd love to hear from you. Please connect with us by sending us an email with your questions and stories to thenfpshow@gmail.com. We'll be back next week with more insights, tips, and heartfelt conversations about natural family planning. Until then, love responsibly.